Okay, in this video, we're going to be solving the Build a Calculator project. This project has us building a calculator class, which gives us basic calculator functionality. For example, the methods add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And the class has a kind of interesting functionality where each of the methods has two different types of behaviors. So you can either pass in two arguments to one of the methods, like we're doing here, or you can pass in a single argument. And the calculator class also supports this idea of chaining methods. So we can call .add and then .add again and then .divide. And basically what the idea here is that every time we call a method, if we pass in a single argument, that's just going to apply the operation of that method to whatever current value the calculator has with the argument we passed in. But if we pass in two arguments, this is going to effectively reset whatever value the calculator has. So the idea is the calculator can have some value at any point in time, and we can just update or change that value by calling a method and passing in a single argument, or we can just start a brand new operation by passing in two arguments to one of these methods. And so hopefully that makes sense. The idea here is really just to allow you to build up calculations, more complex calculations over time by updating an existing value, or to be able to just reset the value in the calculator and start from scratch. So let's go ahead and dive into the code. So we can create a class called calculator, and the calculator should receive an input number when it is constructed. So we want to create a constructor, and this is going to take an initial value of number, and we want to use this initial value to initialize the value that the calculator is storing. So we can go ahead and create an instance property to our calculator called value, and this is going to be a number. And then we want to go ahead and say this dot value equals initial value in our constructor. So this is going to initialize our calculator's value property to be whatever we passed in when the calculator was instantiated. And if you look at the tests, you'll see that the calculator should throw an error if it does not receive this input value here. So we are using TypeScript, so this is enforcing that if you instantiated this calculator, you would have to pass in this initial value. But just to be a little bit more explicit about it, and also to satisfy this test condition, we can add another if statement here, and we can say if there is no initial value, or if the initial value, if the type of the initial value is not equal to a number, we want to throw a new error and say an initial value of a number type is required. Okay, so let's go ahead and just pause there and run our tests and see how we're doing. All right, so we have the first two tests passing, and now we need to go through and we need to implement these methods. And we can start with one of the easier methods, which is the getValue method. So this method should just return the current value that the calculator has. So if we run the tests again, we can see that this is not passing. Why is this not passing? Oh, sorry about that. We of course need to return this dot value. So now you can see that this test is passing. So that takes care of this method. And now we want to go ahead and implement these other methods. And they're all going to have a similar behavior. So we can try to just implement one of them and then sort of adapt that implementation to the other methods. So the add method, for example, is going to have a method signature like this, where the first argument is required and the second argument is optional. And now what we want to do is, if both arguments are present, we update the current value to the result of applying this operation to both arguments. Okay, and then otherwise we just update the current value with the single argument. So what would this look like in code? So we can say if b is not equal to undefined. So effectively if b is present and it's not undefined, then we're in this first case where we want to essentially update the current value of the calculator to the result of adding both of the arguments together. So we can just say this dot value equals a plus b. And then otherwise we're in this other case here. So we can say else we want to just say this dot value equals this dot value plus a. Okay, so this is the logic for the add method, and the other methods will have a similar logic. And before moving on, there's one more piece that we need to add here, which is we need to return something from this add method. And we're going to return this. And the this keyword, as you can see from how we're using it here with this dot value, that this keyword is referring to the current instance of this calculator class. So when we return this here, it's effectively returning the entire class from this method. And what that allows us to do is to have this property of chaining methods like this. Because when we call calculator.add and we pass in 5, this code returns the calculator object again. And that returned object has the .add method, which we can then call again on like this. So this is what allows us to have this .chaining property. So that's the last piece of this implementation. And I'll go ahead and just remove these comments. And if I run the tests, you'll see that the tests for the add method, both of them are now passing. So that's great. Now we just need to go through and apply a similar implementation for the other 3 methods. So we can just copy this code like this 3 other times, and this method is going to be for subtracting, and of course we're just going to change the operation to subtracting. This method is going to be for multiplying, and we're going to change this to multiply. And the last one here is going to be for division, divide, and that will be a divide operation, just like that. And if we pull up the tests here so we can see them all and run the tests again, we'll see that all the tests are passing. Okay, that's great. That's the solution to this build a calculator project. This is a relatively simple project, but it is building a class with a little bit more functionality. And it kind of has these interesting properties of having the dot chaining and then having these 2 different behaviors to a method. So hopefully you learned something from this video, and we'll see you in the next video.